All right, so we are now at the top of the hour. I would like to welcome you all to the webinar, which is IDEXX Tecta, Automate Your Workflow. My name is Clint Burkhart. I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping items. So first, as many of you saw, there's a chat panel in the bottom right of your screen, and you can use that, like people are doing right now, to send a message to everyone, which is a good way to communicate to everyone on the call. And also next to the chat panel, you'll see the questions panel. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the session, and asking them in the questions panel instead of the chat will keep those separate. So the questions panel goes directly to us at the IDEXX team, and it's easier for us to respond. We can respond more quickly because they're separate from the chat. So we encourage you to ask questions. We'd encourage you to do it in the questions tab. And we will, at the end of the session, we will do a Q&A where we answer as many questions as possible. And I just wanted to let everyone know that if we don't answer your question live or run out of time, we will follow up with you after the session with an answer. So you will get an answer to your question. Okay, another question we get a lot is, are the slides available to download? And the answer to that is yes, they are. So if you go to the bottom of your screen where it says apps, if you click that, you should see a handouts tab similar to the one on the screen. And then inside there, there'll be a PDF version of the slides. You can download that at any time during the call today. And another question we get a lot about is certificates of attendance or certificates of completion. We will make one available today later on in the session. I'll let you know when it's posted, but that will also be in the handouts tab as well. And another common question is, the session is being recorded today, and you will receive an email shortly after we wrap up, and that will have a link to the recording that you can watch at any time. Also, we will post the recording to the IDEXX Water Academy over the next day or so you can watch it there as well. And if anyone experiences audio or video issues during the session, help is available. In the bottom left of the screen, you'll see a help icon. If you click that, there's a few options, but the one we encourage you to do is the phone dial-in option. And that will let you actually call in and you'll hear the audio that way. And we found that that does a really good job of addressing a lot of the common issues that people run into. And the last housekeeping item I wanted to cover is polling. So we'd like to ask polls to kind of check in with you and see what your thoughts are on issues. And so with polling, you'll see again on the bottom right of the screen, you'll see a polls tab. And when that's active, you'll be able to vote and participate in the poll. So speaking of, let's go ahead and take one now. So the first poll we want to ask is, how familiar are you with IDEXX Tecta? So that should be available now. If you take a moment to submit your vote, we would appreciate that. Okay, so I'm seeing the results coming in. Looks like about half the people are not familiar at all, and about a third are somewhat familiar, and they've got a 10% that they're very familiar, which is great. Okay, thank you for voting in that. We appreciate your input. I'm going to stop that poll now. So as we saw, a lot of people are new to IDEXX Tecta, which is great, because today's session, we're going to really look at what Tecta is, what makes it different, what makes it stand out. And we're also going to briefly provide an overview of how to test with IDEXX Tecta. And then we're also going to look at scenarios, like use case scenarios for using IDEXX Tecta. So a pretty full agenda, and it's a great place to get oriented to Tecta. So today, as you can see, we are very fortunate to have two great speakers. Emily Frawley, who is a product manager at IDEXX Water. Many of you might have seen her before in a previous webinar. Emily has a bachelor's in biomedical science and an MBA in global business from the University of Illinois. She's been on the IDEXX Water product team for over 12 years in technical and product management roles. And she's played a major role in the launch of many products, such as the IDEXX QuantiTray Sealer Plus, Lead Alert, and EasyDisc. She also leads the global technical training for many IDEXX Water products. Our second speaker is Len White. Len's the Director of Marketing and Product Management for IDEXX Water. Len is responsible for product management, customer education, strategy, and marketing for the IDEXX Water business. He's been with IDEXX since 2015, and he's served in several different roles during that time. So Emily's going to kick things off, and then she'll turn over to Len later in the session. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Clint. Very nice to see you all today. Today, I am very, very excited to introduce to you to IDEXX Tecta. It's a revolutionary new way to do your micro testing. Tecta is not only the first, but it is also the only automated test system that is approved for water testing today. Len and I are going to take some time throughout this presentation to walk you through how your micro testing can now be run anywhere, at any time, and by anyone. So, without further ado, today we are going to walk through the Tecta system, all of the enzymatic reactions behind the tests, and how the extraction of the indicator is a very key difference in this technology. We're also going to talk about the novel idea of continuously monitoring your sample throughout the incubation and the immense benefits that can bring to your lab. Lastly, we will talk about data management and the US EPA approval, because I know how important that is to all of you. Well, the Tecta system is made up of two components, the Tecta instruments and the Tecta Alert tests. Today, there are 4 different test types available for the Tecta instruments. The first is a combination of total cold forms and E. coli incubated at 35. Next is a standalone E. coli test, another novel idea, and this is incubated at a higher temperature of 41.5. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Next is fecal coliforms. So this is incubated at 44.5 with that nice tight temperature tolerance. And the last is a general enterococcus test. Now, I want to start by introducing you to both of the instruments. There are 2, the Tecta B4 and the Tecta B16. Both are what we like to call a lab in a box, because they incubate your samples, read your results, and send you an email when the results are ready. Both of these, and this is very exciting, have a counting range of less than 1 to 10 to the 8th CFU for 100 milliliter sample. That is without dilutions. Very, very nice counting range for this product. The only exception to that rule is for marine water samples, which still require a 1 to 10 dilution, just as you would expect. Now, the biggest difference between these 2 instruments is the number of samples that can be run at once. The B4 can run 4 tests, and the B16 can run 16. The B16 also has a few additional features. Because it's a larger instrument, there are more chambers. It can also run 2 different temperatures at once. So within the unit, you can run 2 different temperatures and up to 3 different tests simultaneously in the unit. Now, Tecta Alert cartridges. I'm going to walk you through a few different features of these. All Tecta Alert tests come in the same cartridge that you see right here. The different tests that contain their unique reagent and also contain enough sodium thiosulfate to neutralize up to 5 parts per million of chlorine in a 100 milliliter sample. The top, you can see a little zoomed in there. It has a place for your sample ID, but it also has the test type and lot information for you. There's a couple of new features on these vessels that I'd like to walk you through. The first is the sterile evidence closure. So you can see that it's located right here on your Tecta Alert cartridge. Now, there's a plastic nub there that if that is not present, it indicates that that vessel could have been opened previously. So if that nub is there, that vessel has never been opened, and it gives you that nice, clear, visible signal. Now, the next is the tamper-proof closure, and that's really the full tab that goes there. Once you've opened your sample, you can actually use that as a locking tab afterwards to make sure that once your sample has been added, it can't be opened again. Now, I've saved the best for last, and that is the polymer probe at the bottom of the vessel. Now, what I want you to remember right now is really just the location of that probe. We're going to talk about that in a lot more detail now, but that probe is co-molded to the bottom of the cartridge, and we'll talk more about why that's important in a moment. Now, for the 4 Tectalert tests, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail. So the first one is for your E. coli and total coliforms. That's detecting both simultaneously. It has a 35-degree incubation temperature, and it's primarily used for drinking water and ambient water. Now, that is the only test that is approved by the US EPA for presence-absence detection in drinking water. Now, the next test I want to show you is the E. coli test. This is E. coli only, incubated at 41.5 degrees. Now, because E. coli is by itself, it can be incubated at a different temperature. I'm sure that's what everybody is wondering. This is a test designed for recreational water, and that increased temperature allows us to have a faster result at 16 hours versus 18 of the combined total coliform and E. coli test. The third test is for fecal coliform detection, and this is for those thermotolerant coliforms at 44.5 degrees. This is a test designed for wastewater. The last one is Enterococcus. This is also a 41.5 degree incubation, also designed for recreational water. Now, this is arguably my favorite part, talking about the enzymes behind the method. Now, Tectalert tests are based on similar enzymes that you're already familiar with from a lot of other IDEXX products. But instead of changing color or fluorescing, the indicators actually change their physical properties. So the example that you can see here is beta-glucuronidase, which is the enzyme used to detect E. coli. On the left side of that reaction, the substrate is hydrophilic, which means it loves to be in water. Makes sense? But on the right side, after the indicator has been released in the presence of the enzyme, the result is now hydrophobic, which wants to get out of water as quickly as possible. Now, do you remember the polymer probe at the base of the cartridge? That is where all of those fluorescing indicators, those hydrophobic indicators, want to go. Now, all of those indicators are now concentrating at the base of the cartridge inside of that probe, and it's being continuously monitored by the sensors in the Tecta instrument. Now, as soon as the presence of that fluorescence is detected, an email goes out to let you know about the positive. Very, very cool technology. Now, let's look at that a little bit closer. Now, in the darkroom image on the right-hand side, you can see what this is looking like close up. On the left, you'll see a probe that has fluorescent indicators in it, indicating a positive result. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a probe without any fluorescent indicators, indicating a negative result. The sensor on the bottom is what's continuously monitoring that for those fluorescent markers. Now, what are some of the advantages of extracting that signal from the water and concentrating it in the probe? There's several. The first is automation. Now, automation eliminates the need for and the errors associated with human interpretation. Now, the next one is pretty exciting. And this one I'm curious to hear from you guys a bit. How many of you guys have had to dilute a sample or modify it in some way because of a color or turbidity? Yeah, lots of people. A couple of people coming in here, just lots of people that have always had to dilute a sample or modify it because of color and turbidity. Well, the Tecta units are unaffected by both color and turbidity. You can run samples of almost any color or just about any color through the Tecta, and it will not have any concerns. I know that every color that's been tested so far has worked just fine. I want to talk a little bit about continuous monitoring because continuous monitoring gives you a couple of different benefits. So I want to start with presence absence. And first, I want to say that Tecta is EPA approved for presence absence detection using the TectaLert ECTC cartridge. Now, this is presence absence for total coliform at 35 degrees. Now, because the Tecta instruments are continuously monitoring that probe, the presence of any indicator on that probe is going to trigger a positive result. Now, one thing we haven't talked about yet is how we detect multiple fluorescing indicators at once. And this really just comes down to color. As you can see, E. coli will be purple on the left-hand side, and total coliforms will give off a blue hue. Both can be uniquely identified by the Tecta instruments. Now, let's talk a little bit about quantification. Now, for quantification results, the initial detection of fluorescence in the probe provides what we call a time to detection, or a TTD. Now, the TTD, or the time to detection, has a linear correlation with the log bacterial count. Now, I'm going to explain that just a bit further for you. Now, what I want you to do is on the chart, focus on just the yellow and the black curves. You can see that the yellow curve, which is a sample with approximately 10,000 CFUs, was detected at about 10 hours. The black curve, which has a sample containing only 10 CFU, isn't detected until 14 hours. Now, using the linear correlation, the Tecta instruments use an algorithm to convert the time to detection to a bacterial count, and this is reported in CFU. If you'd like more information on this, I am going to ask you to reach out to IDEXX after this presentation and we can talk more. Now, some of the advantages of Tecta's continuous monitoring. Of course, total coliform and E. coli results between 2 and 18 hours. This is an 18-hour test for negative results. However, the more bacteria that's present, the sooner you'll get your results. You do not have to wait until the 18 hours if you do have a positive. Now, the middle one, I think, is everybody's favorite. Quantification ranges from 1 to 10 to the 8th for an undiluted sample. Such an exciting development. And because there's no dilutions required, you don't have to take any kind of guesswork for the types of samples that you've got coming in. Again, quick notification that marine samples do still require that 1 to 10 dilution. Now, the last thing I want to talk before I hand you over to Len is about data management. We've talked about the why and the how, so let's now talk about the data. For each sample, you're going to receive a detailed test report. Now, the data can be accessed from the instrument itself, via the email, which has a CSV attachment, or downloaded directly to a USB drive. And I will add that the CSV files can be imported directly into your LIMS system. Now, this data is secure. There's no external communication. The only way that that is going to send results is just to the emails that you have configured within your unit. Now, I am going to hand you off to Len, who will walk you through how to run a test using IDEXX Tecta.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So in this section, I will walk us through how to start a Tecta test in 5 easy steps. And these instructions will apply to both the B16 and B4 instruments. Now, for those of you familiar with running an IDEXX test like Colert, parts of this will feel very similar. So our first step is going to be to open the cartridge. As Emily mentioned earlier, there's a sterile evidence closure that you'll need to release in order to open the lid. To release this, you place your thumb and fingers under the tab and then lift the tab until a tamper-proof nub breaks away. Next, you will add the sample. You will aseptically fill the cartridge to the 100 milliliter fill line. That fill line is embossed on the outside of the container. And then after filling, you'll push the lid closed, or you'll close the lid by first pushing the locking tab into the slot, and then second, putting even pressure on the top of the lid until it snaps closed. Now that locking tab is a tamper-proof seal, and it can serve as verification and evidence that the cartridge has not been reopened after that original sample was added. So once you've closed the lid, you swirl the sample to dissolve the reagents, and we recommend swirling in a circular fashion, as you maybe can see with my hand. We do not recommend shaking the cartridge to dissolve the reagent. So much of that process looks and feels very similar to tests like Colert. And this part is where it starts to be a little different. So on the Tecta instrument, there's a touchscreen display, an on-instrument computer that you can use. And you will start a new test using either your finger or a stylus pen to touch the new test icon on that screen. That will open the new test screen, where you can enter the test information such as sample ID and test type. We've included a screenshot here on the bottom of the page where you can see the fields where this information is entered onto entered on the instrument. So after that test information has been entered, the display will tell you which of the chambers to put the test into. You simply insert the cartridge into that slot and close the lid to begin the testing process. So that's it. It can be done, testing here can be done by almost anyone, anywhere, at any time. The process is simple. Different types of personnel can be trained to do it. And really all that's required here is a power source and an internet connection. After a test has been started, there's still a lot of information and functionality that you can access on the instrument. We don't have time to go into all of this today, but I did want to take a moment to explain a few of the principles of the on-instrument display and controls. In the screenshot that you can see here on the right of the page, you'll see a machine with 7 active tests. The red color here indicates a positive result where the target bacteria was detected. Green would indicate a negative result where the test was completed without finding the bacteria. And yellow indicates that the test is still in process with no positive or negative result yet. The black circles would indicate testing chambers that are available for new tests. So in this example, we have 7 active tests or completed tests and 9 available chambers where tests can be added. Finally, I'll draw your attention to those 3 green icons in the upper corner of the screenshot. These are system status icons. The instrument is running continuous self-diagnostics on the optical, thermal, network, and data storage systems. For example, a green storage icon would indicate that adequate disk space is available to store data. When that icon turned yellow, the user would want to archive data to free up more storage space. These icons can help users avoid surprises and keep the instrument in good working order. So when the test is complete, an email report is created. The instrument can send this email to as many people as you would like. The image here on the screen shows what that report looks like. So you can see at the top of the page some information that characterizes the sample and the test type. And towards the bottom of the page, you can see the test result. The result is displayed in both a presence-absent format as well as a quantification format. Both result types are available for all samples run in Tecta, although the current EPA approval is just for the presence-absence drinking water testing. The sample here in this example was positive for E. coli and total coliform. You can see the positive E. coli result was reported at 12 hours and 31 minutes, and the positive total coliform result was just a few minutes earlier. The quantities are also reported next to the detection time. Finally, the email report will include a CSV attachment with all of the information above in the CSV file. This is really helpful for labs that are integrating these email reports directly into their LIMS. Okay, so now that you understand the technological principles of the Tecta system and the simple operating procedure, I wanted to just close out the presentation by discussing how laboratories can use Tecta. So in this section, I'll focus less on what the instrument does and more on how it helps laboratories and water utilities operate in a new and more efficient manner, solving workflow problems and ultimately delivering better public health outcomes. The solutions I'm going to cover here are rooted in 3 primary benefits: anytime, anyone, anywhere. Anytime, because there's no defined read window for the Tecta test. You can start a test at any time, day or night, without worrying about staffing the lab during that read window. Anyone. The simple ease of use that I just stepped through means that nearly anyone can operate a Tecta instrument with some basic training. And then finally, anywhere. The lab-in-a-box functionality means that the instrument does not need to be located within the 4 walls of a traditional laboratory. It can be located closer to testing sites, which can reduce transit time and improve responsiveness. So I want to walk through some specific examples that'll bring this to life. But first, I have a question for all of you that we can discuss in the chat window. So please open up the chat. And the question here is, what types of emergency testing does your lab perform? So just go ahead and type that in the chat and let's see what comes in here. Water main breaks, absolutely. Line breaks, suspected sewage contamination, spills, boil water, absolutely. Low chlorine levels. Yeah, I mean, this is all spot on. These are emergency situations. These are situations where time is of the essence, and really oftentimes public health is on the line. Yeah, well water testing, that's often on a rush schedule. Construction, we want to maybe bring a building online, bring a main online. Yep, retesting, positives, absolutely. Thanks everybody for those responses in the chat. The Tecta instrument is great for these situations, really any type of emergency or construction sample. And we know that emergencies don't happen on a convenient schedule. And quite frankly, construction crews don't always work on a schedule that's convenient for us either. And so when you're dealing with one of these situations, the fact that you don't need the lab staff to be there in the lab for the reading of the test for a defined read window means that you can start a test at any time with Tecta. So the test can be started when they come in because there's no requirement to have the lab staffed during a read window. This sounds simple, but it's really, really important. So let's just imagine a hypothetical here. Let's say that you get a construction sample that comes in your door at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So if you're using Colert 18, you're probably not going to start that test until 3 o'clock because you won't have somebody to read it until 9 a.m. the next day, which is 18 hours later, okay? With Tecta, you can start that sample right away at 1 o'clock. And then let's further imagine that that sample was a total coliform positive, right? So with Tecta, you might get that test result via email that night at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, really any time, but let's imagine it comes in then. You can let the distribution operations manager know right away so that she can have her crew out there the next morning, flushing the pipe and resampling and getting that to you right away. There are so many other examples like this that I could walk through, retest, boil waters, so on. But with all of them, it's really that ability to start the test at any time and get that early positive notification. That means you're cutting hours or even sometimes days out of these emergency situations. All right, another question for you guys in the chat. This one's more of a yes, no. I'm very curious to see the responses here. Do you start bacteria tests on a Friday or the day before a holiday? Seeing some no's, some yeses. No with a exclamation point. Seattle, 365 days a year. Good for you guys. No's. Yeah. So some yeses and no's, but there's definitely a fair amount of no's. Laura's got a great one. Yes, with overtime worked. So Laura, thank you for that. I think you probably know where I'm going with this, but this is another great benefit of Tecta. If you have a need to test on a Friday or the day before a holiday, day before Thanksgiving, whatever, you can now do that test. It's all about the read window. Again, this is a very important concept because you don't need to be there when the test ends. You have ability to start it whenever you want. And so with almost any other method, you have to staff the lab in that read window, not Tecta. And it's a real difference maker on a holiday and a rush situation and retest situation. But even let's imagine just a real estate sample, right? We know that home inspections don't stop on Fridays. They're every day of the week. And you can now accept those samples. You don't need to turn those samples away without staffing up on a Saturday to read them. So a lot of exciting possibilities to really make that lab operate on a wider schedule during the week. All right, last question. This one's a little harder, saved it for the end. And so for those of you who work at a water utility lab, can you just type in the chat, how far is your lab from the downtown or the city center? You know, minutes, miles, whatever. $10 minutes, 20 minutes. A couple labs throughout the city. Okay, so seeing a couple different responses here. You know, typically I'm seeing anything 15 minutes, half hour. So I don't know how many of you folks know here at IDEXX, we're located outside of Portland, Maine. And so our water utility, the Portland Water District, I looked this up on Google Maps. The drinking water lab is 35 minutes or 17 miles from downtown Portland. So that's, you know, I'm seeing a couple of spots here. I'm seeing somebody say an hour and a half outside the city. So the point here that I'm trying to make, and this one's pretty exciting, is that water treatment plants are typically a decent distance away from the population, especially for utilities that are using surface water as the supply. And that's actually one of the key ideas in water supply planning, making sure that your source water remains free from contamination, which often means putting it as far away as you can from people. You probably take that drive time between the downtown, the people, and the lab as a given today. I know certainly many folks I've talked to just assume that's part of the job. You don't need to. So this is quite an innovative idea that for us to think about. Imagine setting up a Tecta instrument downtown in the city center and wiring it back to the lab with an internet connection. So this way, if there's a one-off sample, just one sample in the middle of the day that you need to test, the operator can bring it to that location with the Tecta instrument instead of taking, you know, maybe a 1 hour round trip out to the lab and back. We actually have a large utility lab doing this already. And every time this happens, they're saving 90 minutes of truck time of not driving that sample out to the lab located outside of the city. And just imagine the amount of time, money, and emissions that this could save for your lab over the long run, plus making those field crews more efficient, taking less time to just drive 1, 2, 3 samples out to the lab and back. All right, so I have a few more examples to quickly step through before we get to the Q&A at the end of the webinar here. And we won't put these in the chat, but I would bet that a lot of you are dealing with labor challenges at your lab, finding enough qualified people to work on the bench or really at the utility in general. And Tecta instruments can help out with this. They're easy to use, easy to train, as we've gone through. So if you're working with reduced staff for a day, someone can easily start the Tecta instrument, start the testing there, and then move on to another job in the lab or maybe another job in the operations at the plant. And of course, they don't need to be there to read the test, as you've heard me say. So that means that there can be some flexibility in testing schedule on those days. So these are situations where Tecta can be a really nice bridge or gap filler on the days or even weeks when you don't have your team at full force. Let's talk about beaches and swimming areas. So similar to an earlier slide, your beaches are often far away from the testing lab. This can mean long drive times, but it can also mean that the test results aren't available until the next day. So it might mean that you closed the beach unnecessarily, or you kept the beach open when it probably should have been closed. Neither of those is good for the public. Tecta can help with that. So imagine having a Tecta unit located near a major recreational area like a beach or a lake, and a trained staff member could collect the samples, begin testing immediately after something like a heavy rain event, some severe weather. And with a rapid notification on highly contaminated samples, you can reduce the time to result and know right away whether it's safe to open that beach for the day. We can also talk about putting a Tecta at the treatment plant for operational testing. And so, as you know, operators can be easily trained to use Tecta, and the tests can be done to verify the effectiveness of your treatment process. As we know, it can measure both PA and quantitative results, even though the EPA approval, the compliance approval is for PA only at this point. And some labs use Tecta this way for this type of non-compliance testing. So you can use the test to make treatment decisions or maybe verify different steps in the treatment process, verify that you're achieving the required reductions in bacteria concentration at various points in that treatment process. Okay, and then finally, kind of continuing the idea of other locations, think about all the locations that are really completely inaccessible to a testing lab. So you see a picture of a cruise ship here, right? But what about military bases, remote communities, industrial sites? These are typically settings where samples are shipped very long distances at great expense to test water quality. And Tecta can solve that by bringing the lab to the remote setting, to the remote area in the form of that lab in the box instrument. You don't need to build a standalone lab. You really just need power and internet connectivity for this instrument. And so a great example here are the First Nations, which is Canada's Indigenous communities. And Tecta is used in many of these locations to test the water quality on site, meaning that they are able to understand water quality, drinking water quality, without shipping samples to faraway labs. Results come in faster and they ensure better public health outcomes for these communities. Thank you, everyone, for taking a few minutes to listen to some of those examples and a lot of great questions here. I'm going to turn the floor back over to my colleague, Clint, who will take us through the question and answer session.
Thank you, Len. Thank you, Emily. Great job. Yeah, as you said, we got a lot of questions that came in today and sorting through those. So let's take a look at some of those now. Before we do that, I'd like to quickly introduce Eric Marcotte. Eric is an R&D manager here at IDEXX, and he will answer questions along with Emily and Len. So Eric is a co-inventor of the Tecta technology. He has numerous related patents, and he has co-authored several publications. So we're lucky to have him here to help answer some questions. So let's look at some now. As a reminder, if we don't answer your question live, we will follow up with you over the next few days. So if we don't get to it today, have some patience and we will get back to you very soon. So let's see. First question in this, how about for you, Emily? How long does it take to read a sample for presence absence on the instrument?
Yeah, so it does vary by test. For the total coliform and E. coli test is an 18-hour test, but you can get results as soon as 2 hours, and all of that is depending on the bacterial concentration. Negatives will be 18 hours.
And let's see. How about Eric? John had a question about emails, and he asked, does it does the Tecta instrument encrypt the emails?
Yeah, so there's many protocols for email encryption, and the latest email encryption protocol embedded in the Tecta systems is TLS 1.2. This offers like a secure encryption connection between two email points, very common with Microsoft Exchange servers currently. That'd be the latest security protocol embedded in the Tecta.
All right, thank you very much. And Len, you covered this, but I think it's important to reiterate. Ryan asked, is the quantitative part approved by the EPA or only the presence-absence part of the test?
Yeah, so at this point in time, it's presence-absence mode that has the EPA approval, and that's for total coliform and E. coli testing. So total coliform rule, drinking water testing.
Okay, thank you. And let's go back to you, Emily. Why do marine samples need to be diluted?
Yeah, absolutely. So marine samples are diluted 1 to 10, and this is the same across all methods. It is diluted to minimize any interference with other organisms that are present in marine water. So that's not based on Tecta, that's across the board.
Okay. And let's see, let's go back to you, Eric. Another email question. Can you have multiple email addresses on the results email that the instrument sends?
Yes, you can. So the email, the Tecta instruments have an email tab where you can actually configure an email address for the outgoing email address for the instrument, and for the recipient email address line, you can add as many email addresses as you want, as long as you separate them with a comma and no space. You can have multiple recipients.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, how about Len? Lydia was wondering, do the Tecta cartridges dechlorinate the drinking water distribution sample?
Great question, Lydia. Yes, the cartridges come with sodium thiosulfate in them loaded, and so they can dechlorinate up to about 5 ppm of chlorine.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to you for this one, Eric. Since the presence-absence method is EPA approved, what types of quality checks need to be done or could be done on the Tecta to validate accuracy?
So with presence-absence test methods, you're going to want to do presence-absence controls. So that includes spiking a sample with a known positive control to test the presence reaction of your reagents. And then a negative control would be a blank water sample or a sterilized water that you add to the cartridge. So this is common to all methods, not just the Tecta methods, for testing presence-absence.
Okay. Let's see, Len, this might be a tricky one, but John asked if there's any future plans for HPC testing with Tecta.
So, John, thanks for that question. We can't really get into what different types of technology are in development. I'll say at this point in time, there are testing cartridges for total coliform, E. coli, fecal or thermal tolerant coliforms, and Enterococcus available.
Thank you. Okay, I think how about I send this one over to you, Emily. Jason said that we have samples shipped from across the U.S. Samples are collected and shipped overnight to the lab. Does this structure fit with Tecta?
Yes. So the samples coming in can be tested on Tecta as well. The samples that you have shipped overnight, I'm assuming are compliance testing because they're outside of that, but they can be run just like a normal sample would be. Eric, do you have any guidance on that, on how the sample should be collected for that specific application?
Well, so the samples that are actually coming into the lab is the perfect scenario for Tecta. You would be just pouring the sample that arrived in the lab, as long as it fit the storage condition requirements, your local storage condition requirements and time frame for shipment. You could just pour that in the Tecta cartridge and do the method that Len described, the 5 steps to just put it into the instrument. Yeah, you can actually use the Tecta cartridge vessel to sample directly into the Tecta cartridge vessel. If you're at a point of sampling is next to the instrument, that would be ideal. And then you would just try to put that cartridge within the instrument within 2-hour time frame for accurate presence absence results and the quantitative result.
Well, I've got you, Eric. We had a couple questions about are we looking at getting regulatory approval in Canada?
Maybe Len has more on that.
Yeah, so the instrument, I think, so the first thing I'll say is there's all sorts of different regulatory approval types in Canada. And so for the person who asked that question, I'd ask if you want to shoot us an email or put it in the chat, and we can get a specific answer for the regulatory situation you are dealing with. But let me say that in general, we are always looking at getting the methods into regulatory standards, and this would be Tecta would be no exception. And we're in situations where it does not have the compliance approval today. You can rest assured we're actively investigating that and trying to oftentimes trying to move that ball down the field.
Okay, thank you. Emily, let's go back to you. Joe was wondering, can you fill the actual test bottle, the cartridge, out in the field?
The short answer is yes. However, we do want you to make sure that you're not using it as a scoop collection. It is just a grab sample. If you try to use it to scoop your river sample, you may send some reagent down the river with it. So collecting samples out in the field is okay. We just ask that you do begin the test for, I believe it's 1 hour for quantification or 2 hours for presence absence testing.
Okay, thank you. Eric, there's been a lot of questions about power and internet outages. And for example, does it work on battery? What happens if the power goes out? Can you just kind of speak to that topic briefly, please?
Yeah. So the Tecta instruments are incubators. So they do require a lot of power to incubate these samples at these temperatures that Emily described, of 35 up to 44.5 degrees for an 18-hour period of time to declare absence. So that requires a lot of power. It is common to use a uninterruptible power supply, which is a battery in line between your power outlet and the Tecta instrument. That is something we recommend to do because if you experience a power outage, the analysis will keep going on. In the background, if you do use a UPS, but those UPS power supplies that are about 2,000 volt amps can power a Tecta unit for about 2-hour period of time. So it's between 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how many. If you're using the smaller B4 versus the larger B16 unit. But that's how much you can expect a battery to power a Tecta unit. Obviously, if you have access to a very large battery, you could connect a Tecta instrument to a battery, but it would probably be a battery as big as the instrument itself if you wanted to do that. So the short answer is no, you cannot. They're not battery operated instruments. But we do recommend an uninterruptible power supply. As far as the question on internet, so internet connectivity is kind of self-monitored by the Tecta instrument. We do have these status icons at the top right-hand corner. If you have it connected to a network, there'll be like a green envelope in the top right-hand corner. And if it does lose its connection to the internet, it will turn into a red envelope to indicate that the internet connection has been lost. And also, if the instrument detects any kind of error message from your server while it's trying to send you an alert email, it will store this in an email manager inside of the instrument and will try to resend that email to you in case that you have a temporary internet shortage or loss of connection. So the instrument will try to resend you emails for up to 48 hours so that you have that information, especially those alert emails from positive samples.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eric. Let's go back to Len. Len Riley asked, is each Tecta sample container specific to the analysis being performed?
Yeah, thank you, Riley, for the question. So the containers are specific for the bacteria target. So we have 4 container types, or 4 different test types. The first is a combined total coliform and E. coli test. The second is an E. coli only test. The third is a fecal coliform or thermotolerant coliform test. And fourth is enterococci. So the reagent in those sample bottles is specific. It's selective to that type of bacteria. So you would not, for example, want to test for enterococcus using the E. coli reagent. However, those bottle types can handle a variety of water types, right? So drinking water and ambient water would use the same cartridge type as long as you were looking for, as long as it was you had the bacteria analyte that you were looking for. And Clint, while I'm on, there was a good question in the chat from Prasad, and I wanted to, it got answered in the chat, but I wanted to repeat it here for everybody. So Prasad asked, what's the test time for total coliform and E. coli? And so the answer is that for a negative result, it's 18 hours to complete a negative test, but a positive result can be detected as early as 2 hours or all the way up through 18 hours. And the detection time will depend on the bacteria concentration. So, typically, let's say we've got a highly contaminated sample, maybe with, 10,000 CFUs per 100 ml. So you can imagine ambient water or something of that nature. You could get a result around 10 hours. But if you're dealing with a low level of contamination, so maybe 10 CFU or so on, that could be in the 14, 15 hour range. So that time to positive result is really going to be related to the concentration of the bacteria.
Okay. Thank you, Len. And let's see, Emily, I'm gonna go back to you. Let me see. Oh yeah, I'm not sure who asked this one, but is it possible to now order cartridges from IDEXX?
The answer is yes. You can certainly reach out to IDEXX for all of your Tecta needs at this time. You can also still order directly from Tecta.
Okay. And we have just a couple more minutes. Let me see what we've got. Let's see, Len, I'll go back to you. What's the shelf life of the Tecta Alert cartridges?
Yep, it's 15 months from the date of manufacture, and the shelf life or the manufacture date is printed on each cartridge, so you can see that for each test.
Okay. And let's see. I have one for you, Emily, and then one for you, Eric. I think that we'll probably be close to out of time. So see, Emily, once a sample has been added to a cartridge, when does it need to be inserted or added into the Tecta instrument?
Yeah, that's a great question. For once you've added your sample, for quantification, if you're using that for non-compliance, you'll want to start that test within 1 hour. For presence absence, you'll want to start that test within 2 hours.
Okay. And I think this will be our last question for today. I just want to make sure we wrap up in time, get everyone out at the top of the hour. And Eric, let's go back to you. And I talked about this earlier a little bit, but the question is, what type of maintenance is required for the Tecta instruments?
Yeah, so on the maintenance side, I would say because it's an optical technology, it's automatically interpreting those polymer sensors underneath each bottles, and each bottles can get messy if you're loading lots of bottles in the instrument multiple times per day or on a daily basis. There'll be drops of water accumulating on the surfaces of your instrument, and these drops of water will come with residue and start adding that residue to the optical, what we call the optical covers in the Tecta instrument, will become soiled over time. So Tecta does offer a validation cartridge. So it's a fluorescent control tool, basically, that comes paired with every instrument. And you can use this validation cartridge on any of the 16 chambers in a V16 or any of the 4 chambers in a V4 to assess the optical path integrity. So it will automatically tell you in 30 seconds whether the optical transmission is at 100% or whether you've lost 20% of the optical transmission is when the instrument will tell you that it failed this QC test. And at that point, you don't need to panic. You just need to open the service lid and clean the windows or those optical covers that I just described with Clorox wipes. And then you can retest them with that same validation cartridge to see that optical transmission has been reissued to that chamber, and have a nice green icon to tell you that the QC test has passed. So that's the most typical service is basically cleaning the windows of the optical of each optical reader in all of those 16 or 4 chambers of your instruments, and checking them potentially on a monthly basis with that validation cartridge to make sure your optical path is nice and clean.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you all. So I just wanted to say we have 3 minutes until the top of the hour, so we're just go ahead and wrap up. I will say we got a lot of questions, which is fantastic. And for those of you we did not answer live, I apologize. But like I said, we promise to follow up with you over the next few days. So you will be hearing back from us, and we will follow up with an answer. So. First of all, Emily and Len, great presentation. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. Eric, thank you for joining us for the Q&A and adding your input and expertise as well. And I also thank Nancy, Krista, and Pam, who've been behind the scenes, keeping things running smoothly. So thank you all. And of course, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us and to spend your time with us. And hopefully you found this session valuable. And also, too, I mentioned the certificate. Nancy, do you mind publishing the certificate of completion for the session, please? That way, so those of you who want a certificate of attendance, you should go to the apps and handouts, and you should be able to download that certificate now. And also, as a reminder, if you do want a copy of the slides, this would be a great time to go download those as well. And also, as a reminder, after the session, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording that you could watch at your convenience. And we will also post the recording to the IDEXX Water Academy over the next day or so, and you can always go watch it there as well. And so for those of you who have not visited the IDEXX Water Academy, we encourage you to do so. It has many courses, videos, other educational materials designed for people in the water testing industry. So for example, we just released, hot off the presses today, a brand new course called IDEXX Tecta, Automation of Water Microbiology. That course will help you learn even more about Tecta. So we encourage you to check it out. And also while you're there, check out some of the other content that we have for you. And if you'd like to register for the Water Camp, if you haven't done so already, in the handouts tab, you can find instructions. You can download those on how to do so. And as you can see on the screen, if you'd like more information about all the educational offerings we have, you can go to idexx.com/water/education. And Nancy, do you mind putting that link in the chat, please, just so people have it handy? Thank you. And so once you go to the site, you can see the new courses that we have on Water Academy. You can see featured articles on IDEXX Currents, and also you can see upcoming webinars that are coming up soon. And speaking of which, this is our last webinar for 2022. But we will be back next year with many, many more sessions throughout the year. So don't worry, we'll be back soon. So yeah, please keep an eye on that page. You'll be able to see what's coming up and be able to register for those as well. And again, if we didn't answer your question, we will follow up in the next few days. And I'd just like to thank you all again for your time and attention. And take care and happy holidays.